Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. Now this week we've been down on the allotment where we're starting to prepare the beds for potato planting. It's not long till we start doing that and you're probably already seeing potatoes for sale in your local garden centres. Back at home we've got the seed of the month, which is Leeks this month, and I've got a bit of an update about our seed sowing and the space that we have for that. So without much ado, let's get into it. Let's go down to the allotment and get started. Well, I'm down on the allotment now, and for me the allotment has been a great source of pleasure over the years. I absolutely love going down the allotment. One of the things I've always said an allotment or gardening in general is great for is for improving our mental health. And that has become relevant today. Now, unfortunately, last weekend I mentioned that I had a really bad cold and I didn't feel well enough to even go out in the garden. So I did stay indoors, curled up with Lucy's book. What I didn't say last week, however, is I was also feeling a little bit depressed. The reason for that is that I actually left the company I'd been working for 18 years. It was my decision. It was a last-minute decision, but it was my decision. I won't go into the details, but I think really I'd been unhappy for a while and it all came to a head. But of course, I went through a bit of a grieving process, and not being able to get to my allotment and deal with things like I've always done in the past was a bit of a challenge. In the past, when things have gone awry, I have had deaths in the family, be it my nan, my granddad, or even my cousin, I've always found that just spending a few hours on the allotment has been good for lifting my spirits and making me feel a little bit better about myself. And that was certainly the case today. I've came down to the allotment and I have tackled a few of the tasks that have been bothering me for a while. So what did I do? First of all was I really got down and cut away the remaining part of the elder tree. You may recall before Christmas I said I was cutting it down, which I did back then. There was still a bit of a stump left, which I finally have now just really cut down really quite low. And then what I've done to kill off the remaining stump, otherwise it could grow back, I've placed a compost bin over the top and I'm going to start filling that up with compost material. What that'll do is it'll just start rotting away at that remaining tree trunk and stop it from growing and make it easy to pull out of the ground. One of the hardest things when it comes to removing trees is always the tree stump. I'm sure many of you have had tree stumps left in your garden from previous owners and things like that. It is a difficult thing to do, but I've always found by sticking a compost bin over the top and using it as a compost bin, it just rots away at the remaining material and it makes it a really, really easy way to remove a tree stump. So I've done that today, which is great because that's another job ticked off the list, which means we're getting closer and closer to really getting ready for this growing season. But the next thing I had to do was a major step in getting ready for the growing season. It was time to get the potato beds into the next area. Now, I've got 3 potato beds I'm growing in this year, and these are my corrugated iron beds. Back at the end of last year, I actually sowed a green manure specifically designed to be a pre-potato mix. These are specifically designed to go in before potatoes are planted. And those green manures actually grew really quite well. I sowed the seeds quite thickly and the seeds germinated, of course, and they grew over the autumn and winter. Unfortunately, the frost has started to kill them off, so I figured now was the time to cut it all back down to earth. And that's what I did. Got my strimmer out and just cut these green manures down to the ground, leaving the foliage on the ground to rot down in place. What that'll do is it'll encourage worms to come along, find all that green manure, find all that organic goodness and drag it down into the soil and incorporate it into the soil, which means our soil will be better for the growing season. It's got humus or organic matter added into it. What I've then done is I've just covered over these 3 beds with some black weed suppressing membrane. This is just going to stop any other weeds from germinating because we do have couch grass, which is a bit of a problem here and can be rather challenging. And I'm hoping this weed suppressing membrane is going to reduce the amount of couch grass growing. But what it's also, I'm hoping, going to do is warm up the soil ready for planting out my potatoes. And because it's black, it attracts the heat of the sun, as I'm sure you are aware, and that just warms up the soil, which means the soil is full of life, ready to grow when we get our potatoes in the ground, meaning that they get off to a good start. Now, back at home, I actually have brought several varieties of potatoes. I always try and grow first earlies, second earlies and main crop potatoes, and I brought those a couple of weeks ago. They've been in my greenhouse in pots chitting, and chitting is basically where the eyes of a potato start to produce shoots. They start to grow effectively. If you've ever bought potatoes from a supermarket and you've left them in a dark cupboard and you've got those long thin shoots, that's what we are trying to recreate by chitting. Now, there's a lot of debate whether chitting is worth doing. I only do chit because they're going to grow those shoots anyway, and I figured it's far better to try and control those shoots rather than letting them do it naturally. What I mean by that, what we want when they start to shoot is we want sort of short, thick, stubby shoots, because they are strong and they are going to show signs of good growth. To get that, we need them somewhere cool and somewhere with plenty of light. If we were to stick them in somewhere dark and somewhere warm, those shoots would be thin, gangly type of shoots, which are very weak and not great for growing vegetables. So I think it's always better to try and control the chitting regardless. So they're in my greenhouse at home, just starting to chit. I will be planting all my potatoes out in March the 17th. Now, I go for March the 17th because that's St. Patrick's Day, and it's easy for me to remember that the association, of course, St. Patrick's being this patron saint of Ireland and Ireland's historic love with potatoes. So the two are easily remembered. Traditionally, people would say that it's best to sow them on Easter Sunday, but the trouble with Easter is that it does move around each year. Sometimes it could be in the middle of March around St. Patrick's Day. Other times, like this year, it's towards the end of April, and that's a whole 6 weeks that we could be missing out on growth. Now, of course, we do have to take care, because if there's a frost incoming, then that could possibly damage the potato shoots as they start to grow. So we do have to keep an eye on the weather and keep fleece handy once they are planted. But that, of course, is in the future. For now, we've just got the potato beds prepped and ready and warming up, ready for our potatoes. And we've got our potatoes brought in and in the greenhouse, ready to go. Now, there's over 600 different types of potatoes that, of course, we could be growing. And this year I'm noticing the potato varieties are quite limited. I've gone for some varieties of potatoes that I've been easily able to obtain, but I've also gone for varieties of potatoes that I know do well in my allotment. But please do, let me know what potatoes you're growing this year and what are your favourite varieties of potatoes. I've actually heard from a few people who are after certain varieties of potatoes that just aren't available this year, so we may have to think about what we're doing and base it solely on what potatoes we can get hold of. Right, I'm going to head on home because it's time to sow our seed of the month. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Seed Supporters Club this week. Well, as I make my way home from the allotment, I'm just going to jump in and ask you if you would be good enough to leave a rating and review on your podcast provider. By rating and reviewing, you help get this podcast found by more people who might also be interested in how to grow their own food. But added to that, this podcast is only able to continue running with thanks to our Supporters Club. Our Supporters Club is set up to keep things that this podcast needs, such as the website, microphones, etc., to pay for all those sort of things. To be a member of our Supporters Club costs just £5 a month. But for that £5 a month, you get access to extra behind the scenes podcasts, as well as once a month you get our monthly seed pack through your door. And that seed pack contains our monthly newspaper, mini newspaper that is, as well as a collection of seeds that can be sown that very month. All that for just £5 a month. And we're looking at other things that we can add to this as well to make it even better. Now, if that is something you would be interested in doing, then head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more. And I really do appreciate everybody that signs up. Well, with that, let's get back to the gardening. Well, back at home in the kitchen garden, and I have got to say I've made the most out of this lovely weekend weather we've had, because I've set myself up with not just a new mini greenhouse, but I've also set up a seed sowing table, a nice little potting bench in which I can work in the future. And that brings me nicely up to what I'm doing today, because it is time for our seed of the month, and this month we are sowing leeks for our seed of the month. Now, for me, leeks are an absolute must. We grow them every year here, and for me, they are such a hardy winter vegetable that to have them right throughout the winter is exactly what we want. Now, if we do this right, we can actually harvest these leeks right from early autumn right up till late May if we needed to, and if done correctly. So I personally think these leeks are well worth sowing. We currently are harvesting leeks on a weekly basis. We've got quite a few down on the allotment and we're enjoying them nonetheless. They're a lovely, sweet tasting, beautiful looking vegetable that just goes so well in so many dishes. Now, there's plenty of choice of different varieties for the seeds. There's Musselburgh, which is one of the most popular and probably one of the most reliable leeks to grow, and it's one that I am sowing today. Bulgarian Giant is another one that I've grown in the past. These are quite large leeks, very sweet tasting, very, very good. And then there's a new seed variety called Allotment, which seems to be quite popular in trials at the moment. So they're three varieties that I have chosen to be brilliant if you are looking to grow leeks. I've added links to Premier Seeds Direct if you are looking to buy these. We get a lot of seeds from Premier Seeds Direct. They are a number one resource for very reasonably priced seeds and pretty much every type of seed you could imagine. Now, what I tend to do when I start off my leek seeds is I actually sow these into old fish boxes. These are polystyrene boxes that restaurants get fish delivered into, sometimes meat as well for that matter. They're insulated so they hold on to heat really, really well, and just means that I can leave these boxes with the seeds growing in them outside without too much fuss. You don't necessarily need these boxes. I just use them because I have them available. Any old seed tray will do the job. But I do like these because I can actually leave these in the box, provided I fill it up with enough multi-purpose compost. I can leave these in the box until we need to plant them in their final positions. And what I do is I just basically fill these boxes half up with multi-purpose compost, scatter a few seeds over the top, trying to make sure the seeds are given enough space apart. You know, we're talking about 1 centimetre all the way around. Fairly easy to do because leek seeds, they're small but they're not tiny. And then I just sieve over a bit of seed sowing compost, about 0.5 centimetre covering, and then give it a good watering. And I place a piece of clear plastic over the top of these boxes just to hold on to a bit of moisture and ensure that the leeks germinate. Now, I would then place this box outside and just wait, but we could of course place them in my unheated greenhouse just to ensure that they get a better chance as well, or even in my new wooden mini greenhouse. Germination can take up to 3 weeks. I often find when I sow them January, February time, I think they have failed, and then they start to grow. Just as I start to give up on them, they start to grow. Really, we're looking for temperatures of sort of 15 to 20 degrees C for them to germinate, which in a greenhouse, in somewhere like that, they can easily achieve. As I said, you don't necessarily need a greenhouse because you can actually sow these from January right up to May. And I tend to try and sow a few seeds, a few different varieties of leeks every month during this period. That way I can just spread out the leeks and the harvesting times in order to try and make sure that we get a longer harvest. I mentioned earlier that if we sow some seeds in May, we can actually harvest those ones up to the following May, which makes it worthwhile. Now, as I said, I do leave these in the polystyrene boxes to grow on. But if I was using seed trays, I would actually have to prick them out into a bit more space just to give them enough space for the roots to grow while they are young. Then what we will be doing is just continue to keep the soil moist, wait until they're about the thickness of a pencil, and then that's when we can plant them out in their final positions. And this is where the real fun bit happens, because when we plant these out in our final positions, we do a method known as puddling. And what it is I dip a hole about 15 to 20 centimetres deep and then drop a single leek in that hole. I repeat, giving each plant about 5 to 10 centimetres of space all the way round, and repeat until all my leeks are planted out. What I then do is get a watering can of water and then just fill up that hole that I've dibbed and planted a leek in with water, and repeat that right throughout all the leeks I have sown. This is known as puddling in, but what it encourages is that we get that nice white blanched stem that we expect with leeks. I'm sure you've all seen leeks. You know, you get that white stem and then you get that green stem at the top. And the white stem is what we really want because that's the sweeter, best tasting part of it. So by dibbing these holes 15 to 20 centimetres deep, dropping the leek into that and letting them grow, that's how we get that white stem. After that, it's just a case of making sure that we water the plants well, we keep the leek bed weed free, and every now and then it's worth feeding with a bit of chicken manure pellets. These are good for high nitrogen crops such as leeks, and actually I do find leeks do benefit from it. I would say leeks are not heavy feeders. They just do like a bit of chicken manure pellets, a bit of nitrogen, about every 6 weeks or so, maybe every 2 months, depending on your soil conditions. And that usually is all we need to do to look after leeks. They're fairly easy. They look after themselves as long as they don't dry out. And then, of course, come the winter, that's when we can start harvesting these delicious plants. And I don't harvest all my leeks in one go. I try and harvest them across several weeks, right throughout the winter. They can tolerate some really cold weather, unless you are exceptionally cold, as long as they are planted out at the right time. Usually May, June, July is when I plant mine out. They will survive the winter without too many problems. Now, one of the things that I should mention as well is you can actually grow mini leeks. I said earlier that we plant them out when they are about the thickness of a pencil. Well, when they are that thick, they are effectively mini leeks. They are tasty, they're full of flavour, you just don't get a huge amount. These are the type of thing that gourmet restaurants would be after. So, you could actually effectively sow leeks a lot later on just to get these mini thin leeks if you so wanted. For me, that's not what a leek is about. Right, well, there you go. Go give it a try. Go check out Premier Seeds and all the links that I've got in the notes for this podcast. Please do go check them out and let me know how you'll get on with your leeks this year. I'm going to meet you back in the podding shed. I'm going to give you a bit of an update of more that's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cook
Scott here, and this week we have a super simple pasta dish that can be ready in as little time as it takes to cook the pasta. And it is spaghetti with broccoli, hot smoked salmon, chilli, lemon and rocket. And the key to this dish is using the broccoli stalk as well as the florets. And it can be made with broccoli stalks alone. You just need to trim the stalk to remove the tough outer skin and only use the tender core. And chop them smaller than the florets so they cook at the same time. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the Veg Grower Podcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seat to Table Plot 13. This recipe will serve 4 and you will need 280 grams of spaghetti, 100 grams of diced white onion, 3 cloves of chopped garlic, 250 grams of broccoli cut into bite-sized pieces, 1 sliced red chilli, the juice and zest of 1 lemon, 1 handful of chopped basil, 1 handful of rocket, 180 grams of hot smoked salmon flaked, 100 millilitres of white wine and 200 millilitres of double cream. Method. Start by getting the pasta cooking as per the packet instructions, usually 10 minutes in boiling water. Now in a wok with a lid or a large saucepan with a lid, start frying the onions and garlic in a little olive oil on a medium-high heat for a couple of minutes. Now add the broccoli and stir fry for 5 minutes, then add the white wine and cover with a lid and allow to steam for 3 minutes. Now remove the lid and add the lemon juice, lemon zest, followed by the cream and bring to the boil. Then add the smoked salmon, rocket, basil and pasta and toss together and season with salt and pepper and serve. And that's the recipe done, and that's it from me this week.
Well, I'm in the podding shed now, and one of the things that I am noticing already is that my seedling collection is getting very, very large. All the seeds that I've sown over the last few weeks, be it the aubergines, the chilies, the onions, the lettuce and so on, are growing at quite a rate. We're pricking them out, potting them on, and they're taking up more and more space, which is something I am lacking. Now, this isn't uncommon for most of us gardeners. We generally find March, April, May that everywhere that we can grow plants, we will have seedlings. Windowsills, shelves, those sort of things. And that is what I'm finding at the moment. My shelf, where I have my grow lights, my heated propagators, are all full of my seedlings, as is my worktops and my windowsills. I've got way too many. And it's going to become a bit of a problem because I like to think of my seed sowing as a bit of a production line, in that as the plants grow and they develop on where to the points that they get bigger, we have to prick them out and so on, they move further and further down the line like a production line. And what we're finding at the moment is we're almost running out of space to move them on anywhere else. So almost become standstill as a production line because we've not got any space. So I say this is not uncommon for most gardeners, especially if you're like us and you're incredibly passionate about it. And what with February, when more seeds have the option to be sown, it's leaving me with a bit of a dilemma of what can I do. Now, I do have an unheated greenhouse outside, as I'm sure you know, but that greenhouse is still pretty cold overnight. Not quite freezing temperatures, but getting down near it some nights. It's a bit of a concern because that is very, very cold. And certainly things like my chilies, my peppers and aubergines, it's going to be too cold for those. And to be honest, with my greenhouse, I wanted that for more growing plants this year as opposed to growing seedlings. We do have a few in there, don't get me wrong, but I want it more for growing our larger plants. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Homebase, and Homebase, unfortunately, are closing down. So while I was in there, I happened to notice that they were selling some mini greenhouses for £39, and I bought one of these. This is a wooden greenhouse. It stands about 1 metre tall, about 60 centimetres long and 40 centimetres deep. So it's not a huge thing. We're not going to be climbing inside it. We can certainly fill it up with lots of our seedlings. This is made out of wood as well, with twin wall polycarbonate as the glazing. So the two things together should actually hold on to heat quite well during the day when it warms up. And there's 3 shelves on the inside of this, so there's plenty of space in there for our young seedlings. Now I've built that and put that next to my shed. It is still cold outside, and it will be cold inside this greenhouse. But certainly for things like my lettuce, my onion, some of the colder tolerant plants, I think they will be okay going in there. And what I will have to do is just put a tray out there, sacrificial tray, to see how they do before I pot the whole lot out there. Now this can carry on during February, because during February more and more of the seeds that we have available to us can be sown. Certainly things like Brussels sprouts, leeks I've already mentioned, cabbages, cauliflowers, things that don't necessarily need a lot of warmth to get germinated or to get growing. They can be sown inside this mini greenhouse as well. It just gives us a little bit more space, frees up a bit more space indoors, and hopefully means that our plants, our seedlings, will continue to grow quite satisfactorily. Now often these mini greenhouses, we see the plastic ones for sale, and I've seen them actually for sale for about £15 inside the range in places like that. I have to admit, I am not a fan of these cheap plastic ones. These are the ones that the metal poles basically slot together to make the frame. You put these little wire shelves in place, and then you wrap over this plastic with a little plastic door on the front. I find that they're cheap. They get blown over easily, and what I often see people report is that the strong winds have came along, they've had all their seedlings in there, the wind has came along, blown them over, and all those seedlings, the labels, have been damaged. Nobody knows what is what. And I've had that happen to myself when I've had these in the past, which is why I'm not a fan of these. I much prefer the wooden ones. I used to have one of the wooden ones like I've got now years ago, and it lasted me a good 10 years. It never once got blown over. The only problem was, as it got older and it got deteriorated, a cat walked on the top of it and that collapsed in. So that's why I've gone for the wooden one as opposed to these cheap plastic ones. The cheap plastic ones people do use, and I'm sure you probably used them in the past yourself. What I find you have to do is put some weight on the bottom to try and make sure that they don't get blown over. But even then, I still find that they are quite susceptible to being blown over. So my advice, if you are looking to expand your growing space or you need somewhere outside, head on down to the home base or places like that and have a look and see what is available. But bear in mind, February can still be a little bit cold, but it's worth setting it up now, ready for March, April, May, when we really, really do start sowing. Of course, once we're into March, April, May time as well, we get options of sowing seeds outdoors, which make things a little bit more easier. As you know, I'm a big fan of trying to sow seeds as early as we possibly can, but we have to make sure we have the right conditions for it. We have to make sure that our daylight length is going to be right for those seeds. We have to make sure that our areas where we're going to be growing these seedlings are warm enough for these seedlings as well. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here at the Veg Grower Podcast, and adding this new grow house will hopefully help. We'll keep you posted, of course. We'll keep you posted. But my advice is, if you are looking at getting one of these plastic ones, either don't buy it or put lots of weight in the bottom. Well, that brings me up to the end of this week's podcast. Hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, then please do leave a rate and review on your podcast provider. I have to say, on the back of last week's podcast, we've had a lot of people who have said they really enjoyed it. Over on YouTube, Jenny and Anna have both said they really enjoyed the podcast with Lucy. It was a real treat. Over on Spotify, Lynn has also said that she has pre-ordered Lucy's book from the library before she even finished listening to the podcast. I really do highly recommend Lucy's book, and it's well worth checking out. Now, February's book for the month is called The Jam Maker's Garden. This is a book that I found in our library. Looking forward to reading and seeing how it gets on. I'm a big fan of making our own jams and chutneys and using our homegrown produce to produce the fruit that we need for these is gonna be high on my list of things that we would like to achieve. So hopefully reading through this book, The Jam Maker's Garden, will help with our goals for that. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of our supporters club. Details on that at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk, which is of course our website. Added to that, while you're at our website, you can leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or you can leave us a voicemail, which is always good because it's good to get questions on our podcast. Added to that, if you want to reach out and get in touch, my email address is richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, and of course you can find me on social media. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.